Hey, Daniel, how's it going?
Hey, Evan. Happy Friday. I'm doing all right. Just gearing up for some home renovation projects I got this weekend and another episode of The Last of Us. How about you?
I don't even know what I'm doing yet. It, I guess it is Friday. It's a snow day here still. So for listeners, Portland got hit this week that we're recording. So, yeah, I probably need to go up and start helping my parents with their taxes. Most likely, that'll be my honey-do list this weekend. So, all right. Well, I know we're moving into our seventh episode of season two. Lifelong learning is what this one's called. Should we jump right in?
Yeah, let's jump into hot topics and introductions. It's crazy that we're already on episode 7 of season 2. Feels like we just finished season 1. But I'll go ahead and introduce our first guest today, someone that we've seen before on the podcast. So recurring guest with over 15 years of healthcare recruiting experience. I'm going to list out just their roles, but it's like the whole hospital here. So we have like physician and nurse recruitment, support staff, accounting, engineering, IT. I don't know if there's anything that we're missing there, but it's an extensive list. And thanks, Marcie, for joining us today on the podcast.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me back. It's great to be here, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Awesome. Well, I got to introduce our other reoccurring guest, probably, now becoming a podcast veteran. I think he can take over for me on a fly. With 16 plus years of revenue cycle patient access, primarily focused management, a former regional director of a 3-time MAP award winning multi-health system organization based in East Texas, a former board director of NAHAM, which keeps us engaged with our NAHAM colleagues as well, and currently our director of people and culture. Welcome back, Tim.
Thank you very much, Evan. I'm always happy to come onto your podcast.
We're gonna have to have you actually like co-host one with Daniel, and I'll just get to do the editing for a change.
I'll work my way up to it.
All right. Well, in this episode, we wanted to bring you guys back and really focus in on like the education component, or how did we all venture into leadership? Because we're all considered Wilshire leaders here, but we all have had different leadership talents and processes in our past lives as well. So really, that's what this is, and wanting to give our listeners some ideas on what they can do future state as we jump into other topics. But for our hot topics portion, we thought we would venture around really focusing in on how none of us were really formally trained as leaders and just kind of grew into our roles, and then how do we continue to expand our own individual knowledge as leaders. So my first question is, I'm gonna switch it up and not go right to our guest and ask Daniel, because Daniel, you gave us really some great perspective on how you became a leader, and all of a sudden had staff. So can you give our listeners a little bit of that story, and then we'll dive into our own?
Yeah, it's a little roundabout. I think if you work in this industry long enough and you get to know enough people, you sort of stumble your way into a leadership role. Just, I don't know if it's tenure based, if it's who you know, or just you have a number of years on your resume. But I found myself with some staff at a previous job. Was doing IT, like manager, director type work, managing a host of analysts, and I found like I had no experience in like how to manage these people. I was like, I've done project management work before, I've been in various other roles on projects, but I've never had people directly report to me, and I didn't ever learn how to address that. I'd also say the place I was working at didn't really have a good support structure or like staff in place to really teach us how to do that. I was just sort of thrown into the fire and told. I remember the first big thing I had was I had to do like a end of year evaluation for these people, and I was like, I don't exactly know what I should be evaluating these folks on. I think they're doing good work. We've been managing things, but we haven't really like set goals in place for these folks, or like types of things I maybe saw in other roles. That was like a wake up call to me that I needed to do some personal work. But I also find that is something that just like I've had good bosses in the past, and I've kind of just looked to them for my experience, but I never really had a formalized training plan in place. So that was something that, as I sit, I'm like, what, 9 years or 9 years into this into this world of healthcare IT, and I still haven't had formalized training, but it's something that I'm exploring and wanting to learn more about.
I couldn't find the mute button, guys. Tim and Marcie, what about you? Like, what kind of, how did you venture into leadership and kind of grow into where you guys are at as leaders today?
Marcie, I'll be the Southern gentleman and let ladies go first.
Okay, sounds good. So I fell into it by accident, just with my HR background. It was just listening to employees and just trying to kind of figure out what it was that they needed in the organization in order for them to stay, or, you know, the goals or things like that that they had in mind. So it was just kind of talking with supervisors or managers and just kind of going over things that I heard from just listening, and then developing processes, even with my recruitment background, just some of the things that I was doing with recruitment in order to, you know, attract candidates to the organizations, and then how long those candidates were staying, you know, as employees. So with all of that, it just kind of gained me a seat at the table to basically say, hey, you know, what we're doing is working, and, you know, just kind of keep building upon that. And that's when I started being heard by leaders. And then I was invited to, you know, basically join the leadership team and say, you know, hey, you can start mentoring these individuals and doing these sorts of things to kind of help the organization grow.
Yeah, and for me, I'm one of the lucky few that I'm very much a take charge person by nature. That's just my personality, and so that I think has served me well in a lot of my career choices and career opportunities that I've had. It got me into entry level leadership. Admittedly, I had a lot to learn when you get into entry level leadership, because, you know, one of the downsides of sometimes having a take charge type personality is that you can come across as being more of a boss than a leader sometimes. And so you kind of have to learn the difference between the two, and what works better, especially when you're working side by side with the team members that you're in charge of at that particular point. From there, kind of went into like a director and then regional director type role, to where I really found a passion for mentoring individuals and helping those individuals grow into their own career paths. Sometimes that could be, you know, leadership careers of their own. Some wanted to go into like the education route, but just helping those individuals by using my experiences and how I was able to kind of get through, say, college, for example, or if I knew individuals in this particular career path and department, you know, within the organization that I work, helping kind of make these connections and help these individuals grow. When you take that approach over, say, the boss approach, which is just telling people what to do, you end up earning a significantly more respect for individuals over the long run. And people, you know, are much more willing to come, A, work for you, and B, follow you into future things as well.
I think it's interesting and unique because we each took a different spin here. And I know I haven't shared yet my story, but we're each taking a different spin on what is a formal leader versus an informal leader, and really like toying with that aspect, right? Like where Marcie started off just like being an informal leader and grasping information and really providing advice and guidance. And then from her story, really moved into more of a formal leadership component, where, you know, Daniel's thrown in and said, here's all these staff and figure it out and just kind of roll with it. And, you know, Tim, you did more of that natural growth and progression component. I think we've each had a unique story. Like, I mean, I started my career off in long-term care, you know, as a dishwasher, and then moved into filing, a file clerk in medical records. And then all of a sudden became a project consultant, where I would go in and like help with executive surveys and things of that nature, and then actually fix where they had a corrective action issue. And out of that, I was able to born like my own position with the organization and move into corporate compliance and billing compliance and doing the compliance realm, and then flip that over to my acute side of the world. Really started off as an analyst and moved from an analyst into a manager within 6 months, and then moved into these components. But I've always never had a job per se that's already been defined until late in my career, actually, where I've always been able to mold and blend it and develop it into either having teams or being influential leader. So, I can think back at my Providence days where I was the revenue integrity program manager. Like, I was over a program. I had team members dotting into me, but I really didn't have staff initially. I had to influence the organization and be an influential leader versus a formal leader. But, I think that's what has allowed me, at least in my career so far, to really look at it as I got to influence people versus tell people what to do. But there is a time and place where you do have to be the boss and also do the hard part, right? Like, and say, no, this is what we're going to do, or this is how it's going to be done, or you're not cutting the mustard. So, what are some things, thinking about your own career path as becoming a leader, that you individually have had to do to expand your own knowledge set to really bring that into and that's a question for all three of you.
I can start. I'll take the lead on this again. I've also never heard "cut the mustard." That's a phrase I've never heard before, Evan. But as far as when I was like thrown into the thick of it, and I was like, "What the heck am I doing here?" I have staff that are looking to me for direction and guidance, and I'm also just trying to figure out like my own direction and guidance. I first took the path of like looking at various, I guess you would call them, like titles or like certifications of sort. Like I was like, I'm going to go get like as much knowledge as I can out there. So I was looking at like a PMP or some other like various things that a lot of folks in our industry will do to expand their knowledge base or expand their project management skill set. And as I was studying for it, I just dropped it. I was like, this isn't really going to help me like lead people. This isn't going to help me like develop like a good culture with the folks around me. And where I ended up pivoting, and I wrote a blog post about this last year. It's probably somewhere on our website. But I started reading books. And I think what ended up happening to me is that when I was like broken down and at my worst spot, and I was like, this isn't going well, there are certain times when you're more receptive to feedback and more receptive to hearing stories. And books are a great medium for that. I read one book in particular called The 1 Minute Manager Meets the Monkey. And it's about like a manager who's been broken down and trying to figure out like, how do I manage people? How do I do this responsibility that's been given to me? And just like getting those stories and anecdotes were really helpful for me to piece together my path as a leader. I'll pass the mic to Tim. Tim, you wanna chime in?
Yeah, I found that, again, I was, the type A and kind of thrusting myself into the management thing is where I kind of started. But I found that, with that growth and success that I was really pursuing at that point, it got to a point to where, oh, now I'm the director. Now I'm not the one that's enforcing Fed policies. Now I'm the senior most access individual, in this organization. I have to write the policies and procedures, which means I have to know a lot more about like the regulations and laws and things that govern patient access and insurance and things like that. So I found that a lot of where I take towards was more towards like organizations like Mayhem and different educational outlets and things of that nature, to where I can make sure that I am very familiar with how things have to work. And then I would take the knowledge that I gain and then apply that, back at my organization. That also helped me connect with a lot of other more seasoned access professionals, which I was really seeking out at the time, that I could bounce ideas off of kind of, well, why don't we do this versus this, say with like Medicare or something like that. And so they would have a lot more information on that I could kind of learn from. But that was probably my most valuable source of education and growth for me, is that, finding other like-minded peers and getting, vertical and horizontal type mentors to kind of help me out through that.
Yeah, for me, it was along kind of both the lines of yours, Tim, and Daniel's, but it was a little bit different because I kind of started the workforce probably before you guys did. So cultures were a little bit different back then, and it was hard to have voices heard or to be taken seriously for certain things. So I did a lot of sitting back and watching and seeing what a lot of managers that I had, what they did, and how it made me feel personally within my career. And then I would say, well, if I ever have the opportunity to where I get to be a manager or a leader, I don't want to behave this way. I don't want somebody to feel this way. So what am I going to do that's different? And then the second question was, what am I going to do for myself to where I would have the confidence to be taken seriously, that if I ever had the opportunity to be a leader, what do I have to solidify that I have the skills to do that? So I would read a lot of books. So one of the books I read was How to Influence Others. I read that book, How to Make Friends and Influence Others. That was like one of the first books that I read. And then I read like Who Took My Cheese? That was a good book. And I mean, I'm talking like I was probably 20 when I read the book, Who Took My Cheese? But I mean, it's still something that stays with me throughout changes in organizations and letting people go. And how do people take that and how do they handle that? And then it was a personal need for myself to get those certifications in HR. So taking a course to study for those and get my, APHR, which is an Associates in Professional Human Resources with HRCI, and then getting my PHR, which is Professional in Human Resources with HRCI. For me, that still wasn't enough. I wanted to solidify the fact that I knew what I was doing in recruitment. So I took a course and took an exam to get my PRC certification, which is Professional Recruiter certification. And then when I came on board with the Wilshire Group, I am kind of recruiting for a little bit different healthcare opportunities than what I was recruiting for before. So in order for the candidates to take me seriously as a recruiter, I had to understand what the job descriptions were, what individuals were doing. Now, I started out of the hospital, as a patient rep, admitting clerk, I understand all like the front end, but when you get more into the mid cycle of revenue or the back end, I wanted to be able to have a conversation with these candidates to say, hey, I understand what you're doing. I can sell this job to you and the organization. So for me, part of the lifelong learning was I felt it was necessary to get my CRCR through HFMA and have that certification, just so if somebody's out there on LinkedIn, well, why would I want to interview with the Wilshire Group or interview with Marcie? Does she even know what we do as revenue cycle consultants? So, and again, I don't stop. Like I'm reading Digitizing Talent right now. I just finished Trust and Inspire, which is a servant leadership way of, leading others. I'm constantly reading, constantly learning, constantly trying to look things up. And I feel like an individual who wants to be in leadership has to continue to do that, to stay up with current trends, multiple generations that are now going to be working together. I can digress. I can go on all day about this, but I will stop.
Well, we're going to continue to go on. Go ahead, Tim.
Interestingly enough, Marcie inspired me to pick up a couple of books that I would have never thought to get in the first place. I'm actually in the process of going through HBR's top 10 must reads on building a culture, which is one of the books that Marcie recommended, and directly applies to what my internal role with Wilshire and what I'm tasked with doing over the next year or two is really trying to build up a formalized culture and mentorship program with the Wilshire Group. So
we need a published book list. That should be like someone's blog idea. Like if you need a next blog, just like publish the best 10 list, best 10 books that people recommend here.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Well, on that note, we're going to take a quick break and we will be right back.
Claim Capital is a team of ex-Epic staff focused on preventing denials. Instead of showing what was denied, which is the standard for other solutions available today, Claim Capital pinpoints why claims are denied. By training machine learning models on an organization's claim and remittance data, Claim Capital can identify the causes of denials and recommend changes in EHR build or workflows to prevent them from happening in the future. With a completely HIPAA-compliant infrastructure, no software implementations, and a zero-risk pricing structure, organizations can quickly and safely recover lost revenue.
And we're back.
All right, so we're going to transition into our next segment here. I'll take my notes about a book list for another time, but going outside the box, Evan, you want to kick us off here?
Yeah. So, as we talked about our own personal growth as leaders and some things that our listeners might want to consider about development, Tim, I think you alluded to mentorship and a mentorship program. And I think mentorship is one of those out of the box ideas of, what people think. Can you expand a little bit more for us in our listeners?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Mentorship is a passion of mine in a lot of ways. I love being able to influence and help people grow. It's how I built a lot of my career to this point, and I think part of the reason that I was given the role that I have with Wilshire. I've quite frankly, finding it a little challenging because the mentorship with a company that works so remotely from each other is vastly different from, say, something where I can pull somebody into my office and have a one-on-one conversation for, say, like 30 minutes or an hour to help kind of guide and direct things. So where I'm having to kind of go outside of the box even a little more just to try to work through exactly how this mentorship program should look. I'm working very closely with Marcie on a lot of that. A couple of the ideas that we have is identifying, individuals within Wilshire that we think would be good mentors to, maybe some of the newer Wilshire group, maybe newer consultants that have never done a consulting type role before, and pairing those types of individuals together. We found some formal training for people that, may be interested in doing mentorship but have never formally done it before. So we're looking at kind of rolling out a bit of an education platform with this as well. And then eventually growing this a little further. We've had people that have expressed interest with, learning more about how to become a leader because they know nothing but consulting at this point in their career and they want to transition more into the operational side of the house, or vice versa. You have an operational person that's wanting to transition the other way. So trying to strategically pair these individuals with other individuals that have a lot more experience within the organization, and then hopefully help encourage and grow that relationship over the coming weeks and months to make something of this program long term.
I think that really speaks to, like a formal program, but mentorship can definitely be an informal program as well. And I'll flip flop it on the opposite side. Like it was like, I look at my career and look at, really inspiring leaders for me. I mean, I've worked for leaders who I would never want to work for again. And I've worked for leaders who I've maintained long-term relationships with years and years later. I mean, I can think of one, Marty Moore, former chief nurse here in the Portland metro area, was with Providence. She's gone to Medline Industries and a bunch of other places now and doing her own kind of nurse mentor consulting component. But she's still somebody to this day. Like I'm thinking of my clients that I'm working with today, and they had a loss, which is where I've stepped in now as their interim leader. And first person I thought of, like, who should I reach out to? It's around Christmas time. This team is struggling with like loss and grief at the same time of trying to move an organization forward. And they're in calendar year end and nearing their fiscal year end, trying to target it. First person I reached out to as my mentor to say, hey, what can I do or what should I be able to do for these individuals? So just kind of like thinking of it in a different, aspect, and actually alludes to a book. So I'll add to your list there. But